This lesson is about the concept of timeline. Now you must be wondering, what exactly do I mean by a timeline? Now editing essentially is basically redefining time on screen. Just like we have a timeline in real life, we were kids, then we become adults, and then we become mature old individuals. Similarly, in when you're seeing a story itself also has a timeline. It is usually has a defined age of say about 3 hours if you're talking about a feature film, maybe an hour if it's a documentary, and something as small as say 3 minutes if it's an ad film. Now, depending upon what your timeline is, accordingly your editing pattern, your editing strategy, everything changes depending upon what your timeline for the story is. So if you have something as long as 3 hours to tell your story, you can spend a lot of time in establishing your incident, which is your beginning. You can again spend a lot of time in establishing a conflict of your story, and again adequate time in then establishing the end of your story. But if your timeline is immediately reduced to 1 hour, you will have to reorient your strategy of telling your story effectively. So probably you might do away with unnecessary portions which drag the story, which make it repetitive, which is unnecessary, or which is just plain uninteresting. So then you have to think of different strategies and different allocations to tell your story in the same defined timeline of 1 hour. 3 minutes is all the more challenging. You have to quickly establish your incident, establish a conflict, and resolve. So that gives you very little time to actually effectively tell your story. So your timeline is what ultimately defines your storytelling strategy. Now in the last lesson we talked about what is a timeline. In this lesson we will talk about some key concepts which are associated with timeline. Now, since we have a defined timeline to tell our stories, we automatically have to play with time to be able to tell our stories effectively. And what helps us to do that is a key concept called as compression of time. Compression of time means playing around with times. You can expand a certain moment, a certain series of events, a series of scenes, series of sequences, and accordingly you can compress them. You can show a very long event in a very short span of time. Now this is called as compression of time.